The HOA president climbed onto my family's cemetery carrying a Starbucks cup like she owned the place. She pointed at the 11 gravestones behind me and smiled. "Mr. Turner," she said loud enough for every construction worker to hear, "you have exactly 10 minutes to move those fake gravestones before my bulldozer does it for you." The workers laughed. One of them even started the engine. I pulled an old leather folder from my truck and tried one last time. "Melissa," I said, "this isn't empty land. These graves are protected. If you touch this hill, you're breaking federal law." She didn't even look at the papers. Instead, she took a sip of her coffee and waved her hand. "Flatten it." The bulldozer lurched forward. Its steel blade slammed into the black iron fence my great-grandfather had built more than 100 years earlier. Metal snapped. Stone cracked. My family's cemetery disappeared beneath clouds of dust while the HOA board stood there clapping. Melissa looked straight at me and said the words I'll never forget. "People like you are the reason this neighborhood can't move into the future." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply took out my phone, recorded every second, and made one phone call. "Yes," I told the person on the other end. "They're doing it right now." 3 months later, the same HOA president who laughed while bulldozing my family's cemetery walked into a federal courtroom wearing a $3,000 designer suit. She walked out facing millions of dollars in damages, criminal investigations, and the complete collapse of the HOA she thought made her untouchable. All because she believed a cemetery was just another obstacle standing in the way of her luxury dog park. She couldn't have been more wrong. My name is Jack Turner, and until last spring, my biggest worry was whether we'd get enough rain for the hay fields before July. My family has owned Turner Ridge Farm in Ashford County, Virginia, since 1871, while every farm around us disappeared beneath subdivisions, shopping centers, and gated communities. We stayed. Not because we were rich, not because we were stubborn, because my father made me one promise before he died. Never sell the land your grandfather fought to keep. So I didn't. The farm covered just under 200 acres of rolling pasture, old oak trees, and a creek that had never gone dry. On the highest hill sat a small cemetery surrounded by a black wrought iron fence. Only 11 people rested there. My great-great-grandparents, a Civil War veteran, my grandparents, my parents. Every Sunday morning, I placed fresh flowers on those graves before starting work around the farm. Nobody had ever questioned the cemetery, not for nearly 150 years. Then Brookstone Estates arrived. The developer advertised it as luxury country living. Ironically, they built it after buying every piece of farmland around mine. Within 2 years, more than 600 expensive homes surrounded Turner Ridge Farm. Most of my new neighbors were decent people. They waved when I drove my tractor. Kids stopped by to feed the horses. Families bought fresh eggs from our roadside stand. Then the HOA elected a new president, Melissa Crawford. She moved into Brookstone with expensive SUVs, designer clothes, and the attitude that money could solve every problem. During her first HOA meeting, she promised residents she'd increase property values by making the neighborhood more modern. A month later, letters started arriving in my mailbox. The first one claimed my old red barn was an unattractive view from several luxury homes. The second demanded I replace my wooden fences because they looked outdated. The third suggested I stop keeping cattle in the pasture closest to the subdivision because the smell wasn't consistent with a premium community. I laughed. Then I threw every letter into the fireplace. The HOA had no authority over my farm. They knew it. I knew it. But Melissa wasn't interested in legal boundaries. She was interested in getting her way. 2 weeks later, she showed up at my front porch wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. She smiled like we were old friends. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I'd like to make you an offer." I invited her onto the porch. She opened a leather folder and slid a purchase agreement across the table. "I'll make this simple," she said. "The HOA wants your northern hill." I looked at the map. My stomach tightened. The highlighted section wasn't just any hill. It included my family's cemetery. I'm not selling. She smiled even wider. You haven't heard the price. I don't care if it's $10 million. Her smile disappeared. You should care. I folded the paperwork, handed it back, and stood. That hill isn't for sale. Melissa slowly closed her folder. You'll regret making this difficult. I watched her SUV disappear down the driveway. Something told me that wasn't the end of the conversation. It was only the beginning. The next morning, survey stakes appeared around my family's cemetery. At sunrise the next morning, I grabbed my coffee, climbed into my pickup, and drove toward the north pasture. From a distance, something looked wrong. Bright orange survey flags were sticking out of the ground every 20 or 30 feet. They ran in a perfectly straight line, right through my hay field, across the old stone lane, and straight toward my family's cemetery. I slammed the truck into park. Who the hell did this? I walked the line of flags until I reached the first wooden stake. A laminated tag was stapled to it. Brookstone Estates, Future Community Greenway stared at it for several seconds. Nobody had asked my permission. Nobody had called. They had simply walked onto my property and started marking it as if they already owned it. I pulled every stake out of the ground and tossed them into the bed of my truck. Before I could finish, 2 white SUVs pulled into the pasture. Melissa Crawford stepped out with 3 members of the HOA board and a man carrying surveying equipment. She didn't even say good morning. You're interfering with an approved community improvement project. I laughed. Approved by who? The HOA board. I looked around at my farm. The last time I checked, your HOA doesn't own any of this. The surveyor cleared his throat. Ma'am, I told you we should verify the property line first. Melissa ignored him. She walked over, picked up one of the survey stakes from my truck, and pushed it back into the ground. Mr. Turner, this land will become a walking trail connecting the neighborhood to the new dog park. I pointed toward the iron fence surrounding the cemetery. That trail goes straight through my family's graves. She shrugged. The cemetery looks abandoned. It isn't. No one has been buried there for years. That doesn't make it abandoned. You can't expect 600 homeowners to give up a beautiful community project because of 11 old gravestones. I stepped closer. They aren't just gravestones. They're my family. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Melissa smiled, a cold, confident smile. Everything has a price, Mr. Turner. No, name it. I already did. She turned toward the surveyor. Finish your measurements. The surveyor shook his head. I can't. The property owner has ordered us to leave. Melissa's face hardened. I hired you. And if I continue after being told to leave, I'm trespassing. Without another word, the surveyor packed up his equipment and walked back to his truck. Melissa looked furious. As she climbed into her SUV, she rolled down the window. This isn't over. I answered calmly. I know. For the next 2 weeks, strange things started happening. Neighbors told me they had attended HOA meetings where Melissa showed colorful renderings of a luxury dog park with walking paths, benches, decorative lights, and a fountain. The centerpiece of the design sat exactly where my family's cemetery stood. Whenever someone asked what would happen to the cemetery, Melissa dismissed it with the same sentence. It's an abandoned family plot. We'll relocate a few stones and improve the community. She never mentioned that she didn't own the land. She never mentioned that no court had approved any relocation. She never mentioned that she had already hired contractors. Then one Friday afternoon, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a copy of a construction schedule. Demolition begins Tuesday at 7 a.m. They weren't asking anymore. They had decided to take my land. And Tuesday morning was only 4 days away. I didn't spend those 4 days waiting. I spent them preparing. First, I called the county planning office. The woman who answered searched every permit filed for the area. After a few minutes, she sounded confused. Mr. Turner, there isn't a single permit approving construction on your property, so they can't legally start. No, sir. Not unless you sign something. I never signed anything. Then if construction begins, call law enforcement immediately. That should have been enough to stop any reasonable person. Melissa Crawford wasn't a reasonable person. Next, I hired a licensed land surveyor. He spent an entire day confirming what my family had known for generations. Every inch of the cemetery sat well inside my property line. Nothing, even the old access road, belonged to the HOA. He handed me a certified survey with official county coordinates. Keep multiple copies, he advised. If anyone challenges this, they'll lose. I hoped he was right. Monday evening, one of my neighbors from Brookstone knocked on my door. His name was Brian Collins, a retired Army sergeant. He looked nervous. "Jack, you need to see this." He handed me several photos he'd taken during the HOA board meeting that afternoon. The pictures showed a large presentation board. Across the top were the words, "Brookstone Dog Park, final approved design." I stared at the rendering. The walking path curved directly through my family's cemetery. The gravestones weren't there anymore. Instead, there was a decorative fountain, a wooden gazebo, and a sign that read, "Future home of Barkstone Commons." Brian shook his head. Melissa told everyone the land already belonged to the HOA. My jaw tightened. Did anyone question her? A few people did. And she said you'd already agreed to sell. I laughed once. It wasn't because anything was funny. It was because I couldn't believe someone would lie that boldly. I never agreed to anything. "I know," Brian replied. "That's why I'm here." He pulled out his phone. I recorded the meeting. For the first time all week, I smiled. "Don't delete that." "I won't." Tuesday arrived before sunrise. At 6:20 a.m., I heard diesel engines. By the time I reached the north pasture, 2 bulldozers, 3 dump trucks, a backhoe, and nearly 20 workers were lined up outside the cemetery gate. Melissa Crawford stood in front of them wearing a spotless white blazer and holding a clipboard. When she saw me, she smiled like she'd already won. "Good morning, Mr. Turner." I walked straight toward the equipment. "This is private property." She ignored me. I held up the certified land survey. "This proves the cemetery is entirely on my land." She never even looked at it. Instead, she turned to the construction foreman. "We're already behind schedule." The foreman hesitated. "Ma'am, the owner says, I don't care what he says." She pointed toward the iron fence. "Take it down." The foreman looked at me, then back at Melissa. Finally, he sighed. "I'm going to need written authorization." Melissa pulled a folder from her briefcase and handed him several papers. The foreman glanced at them. His face changed. He looked confused. "These documents don't transfer ownership." Melissa's smile disappeared. "They're all you need." "No, they're not." An uncomfortable silence spread across the field. For one brief moment, I thought the workers were going to pack up and leave. Then Melissa stepped closer to the foreman and spoke quietly. I couldn't hear every word, but I clearly heard one sentence. "If we stop now, the HOA will find another contractor." The foreman looked at his crew, then at the machines. Finally, he climbed into the bulldozer. The engine roared to life, and I realized Melissa had just convinced someone to gamble his entire business on a lie. The bulldozer rolled toward the cemetery so slowly that, for a second, I thought the operator might stop on his own. Instead, the steel blade slammed into the old wrought iron fence. The sound echoed across the pasture. Metal twisted. The front gate collapsed. 120 years of family history hit the ground in less than 5 seconds. I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Today is Tuesday, 7:04 a.m., I said into the camera. "I'm standing on my private property. The Brookstone Estates HOA has entered my land without permission and is destroying my family's cemetery." Melissa heard every word. She laughed. "Make sure you get my good side." I did. I recorded her face. I recorded the bulldozer. I recorded every truck logo, every license plate, and every worker on site. Then I dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" "My family's protected cemetery is being destroyed by construction equipment. I need deputies immediately." The dispatcher asked for the address. I gave it. She told me officers were on the way. Melissa folded her arms. They'll tell you exactly what I've been telling you. I didn't answer. I kept recording. The bulldozer pushed farther into the cemetery. An old stone marker tipped over and shattered against another grave. The operator suddenly stopped. He climbed out of the cab. "Ma'am," he called, "there are bones." The entire construction site fell silent. No one moved. The operator stared into the freshly disturbed ground. "I think we just uncovered human remains." Several workers stepped backward. One crossed himself. Another quietly removed his hard hat. Melissa walked over, looked into the broken earth for barely 2 seconds, and said the words that shocked everyone. "Keep digging." The operator stared at her. "I can't do that. You work for me." "No, ma'am. I work for the construction company. If you stop now, you're fired." The operator looked down at the open grave one last time. Then he removed the keys from the bulldozer. "I'm done." He tossed the keys onto the seat and walked away. One by one, other workers followed him. Within 2 minutes, half the crew refused to continue. Melissa's face turned bright red. She screamed at them, threatened lawsuits, threatened to ruin their careers. Nobody listened. Just then, 2 sheriff's deputies turned into the pasture with their emergency lights flashing. Behind them came another SUV, then another, then a pickup truck with the county coroner's office. Melissa's confident smile vanished for the first time. Sheriff Tom Reynolds stepped out of his cruiser and looked at the damaged cemetery. He didn't say a word for nearly 30 seconds. Finally, he turned toward Melissa, who authorized this excavation. She confidently handed him her folder. "The HOA." He flipped through the papers, then looked at me. "Mr. Turner, do you own this property?" "Yes, sir." "Did you give anyone permission to disturb these graves?" "No." The sheriff closed the folder. Very slowly, very carefully. Then he looked directly at Melissa Crawford. "Ma'am," his voice became ice cold, "I think you're going to need a lawyer." The coroner's SUV hadn't even fully stopped before the entire mood in the pasture changed. Nobody was arguing anymore. Nobody was yelling. Even Melissa Crawford had gone quiet, like she suddenly realized volume wasn't going to fix what was already happening. The coroner stepped out first, adjusted his gloves, and walked toward the disturbed ground. "Everyone back," he said calmly. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. The workers backed away from the cemetery like the land itself had turned dangerous. Sheriff Tom Reynolds pointed at the bulldozer. "Shut that machine down." Now, the operator obeyed immediately. The engine died, and the sudden silence felt heavier than the noise had been. I stood there holding my phone, still recording, my hands steady now in a way they hadn't been all morning. Melissa tried to recover. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "We were approved by the HOA board." The sheriff cut her off. "An HOA does not authorize excavation, especially not of what appears to be a burial site." The coroner knelt near the broken soil. Then he paused, looked up. "We've got confirmed remains here." That sentence changed everything. The word confirmed didn't just hang in the air. It spread through every person on that field like a shockwave. One of the deputies immediately stepped aside and spoke into his radio, requesting state historical unit and forensic team. Possible unregistered cemetery disturbance. Melissa finally turned toward me, and for the first time, her voice wasn't confident. "You did this," she snapped. I didn't even react. I didn't bring bulldozers onto my land. That shut her up for a second. The sheriff took a step closer to her. "Ma'am, I need your identification and all documentation you relied on to authorize this work." She hesitated, then opened her folder again. But this time her hands weren't steady. She handed over papers that were supposed to approve everything. The sheriff read one page, then another, then stopped. "These are HOA meeting minutes and a landscaping proposal," he said slowly. "Yes," Melissa said quickly. "It shows community approval. It does not transfer property rights." Her mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Not angry, not entitled, Uncertain. The coroner stood up. There's more than one burial here, he said quietly. This looks like a formal family plot, possibly 19th century. That's when Sheriff Reynolds turned toward me again. Mr. Turner, is this cemetery registered with the county? Yes, I said. It's listed in old land records. It's been in my family since 1871. The sheriff exhaled slowly. Then this just escalated. Melissa stepped forward again. It's just old land with stones on it. Nobody's been buried here in decades. The sheriff raised a hand. Stop talking. She froze. He looked at her directly. Do you understand what you've done here? Melissa tried to speak. No words came out at first. Behind us, another vehicle pulled in, this one unmarked. Two men in suits stepped out. One of them showed credentials. State Historical Preservation Office. They took one look at the exposed graves and immediately walked forward without saying a word. The senior official crouched, examined the markers, and turned back sharply. This is a protected historic burial site, he said. Melissa blinked. That's not. I was told it was abandoned land. By who? The man asked. She didn't answer, because there was no answer that would save her. The sheriff turned slightly, speaking now to his deputies. Secure the site. No further disturbance. Then he looked at Melissa again. Ma'am, you are being formally documented for unauthorized land entry, destruction of potential protected graves, and interference with a historical site investigation. Her face went pale. For the first time, she stepped backward instead of forward. And that's when I realized something very simple. The HOA hadn't just lost control of a project. They had walked straight into a legal storm they didn't understand. And it was only getting started. By mid-morning, the pasture didn't even look like my farm anymore. It looked like a federal case waiting to happen. Yellow evidence markers appeared near the broken fence. Survey tapes stretched across the disturbed ground. And every few minutes, another official vehicle pulled in, state investigators, historical experts, and legal observers taking photos from every angle. Melissa Crawford stood off to the side now, no longer in the center of anything. For the first time, she wasn't directing the situation. She was being contained by it. Sheriff Reynolds approached me again, this time speaking more quietly. Mr. Turner, I'm going to need every document you have proving ownership of this land and the cemetery. I handed him the certified survey first, then the old land deed copies, then the cemetery registry my father had kept in a fireproof box. He studied them carefully. One of the state historians leaned over. This is consistent with a continuous family burial site dating back to post-Civil War settlement patterns. He looked at me. This is exactly the kind of site we're required to protect. That's when Melissa finally spoke again. Her voice was sharper now. This is insane. It's just a private farm. We were building a community improvement project. A state investigator cut in immediately. Did you obtain any archaeological clearance permits? She hesitated. No, because we were told it wasn't necessary. By who? The investigator asked again. Melissa looked toward the ground. No answer came. Because every answer led back to one thing. Assumptions, not authority. The investigator opened a tablet and started scrolling. Let me be very clear, he said. Any disturbance of a burial site without authorization is a violation of multiple state and federal statutes. Melissa finally turned toward me again. But this time her expression wasn't anger. It was panic. This is your fault, she said again, weaker this time. You should have told us. I laughed once. Short. Dry. You never asked. That hit harder than anything else I said all day. Because it was true. No one had asked. They had assumed. And now they were paying for it. By noon, the legal machine had fully activated. A county attorney arrived. Then a state attorney. Then a federal liaison who didn't say much, but took notes on everything. Sheriff Reynolds called me aside. Mr. Turner, he said, this has moved beyond local jurisdiction. Federal historical preservation laws may apply here depending on what they confirm in the excavation. I nodded slowly. I just want my family's graves left alone. They will be, he said. From this point forward, nothing moves without court approval. Across the field, Melissa was on her phone for the first time all day. But whatever conversation she was having wasn't going well. I could see it in her face. Short responses, repeated pauses, then silence. When she finally hung up, she looked like someone who had just realized she was no longer in control of her own situation. That afternoon, a forensic team uncovered something that changed the tone completely. Not just broken markers, not just disturbed soil, but a buried boundary survey stake with markings dating back over a century. One of the historians examined it carefully. This confirms formal cemetery designation under historical land use law. The state investigator immediately photographed it, then turned toward the sheriff. This will require federal review. Melissa overheard that, and her entire posture collapsed slightly. Federal? She repeated. No one answered her, because at that point, she wasn't part of the discussion anymore. She was part of the investigation. Later that day, attorney Michael Harris, a property rights lawyer I had called earlier that morning, finally arrived. He took one look at the site and didn't waste time. "This is worse than I thought," he said quietly. I stepped closer. "How bad?" He glanced at Melissa, then back at me. If they knowingly represented ownership or authority they didn't have, this can become criminal very quickly. I didn't react, but I noticed Melissa heard every word. And for the first time, she looked at me not like a neighbor she could push around, but like someone who had just become a witness in her downfall. As the sun began to lower, Sheriff Reynolds officially taped off the entire cemetery. No entry, no exceptions. And as the yellow tape went up, the last thing I saw that day was Melissa Crawford standing alone near her SUV, staring at the field she had tried to take. Except now, it wasn't hers. And it never had been. The first crack in Melissa Crawford's control didn't come from me. It came from her own HOA board. That night, while investigators were still on site and the cemetery was under federal hold, Brookstone Estates held an emergency meeting inside the community clubhouse. I wasn't there, but Brian Collins was, and he recorded everything. The room was packed. Homeowners, board members, and a few contractors who had suddenly started realizing their invoices might not be getting paid. Melissa opened the meeting like nothing had happened. "Today was a misunderstanding," she said firmly. "The situation is being handled." A few people nodded, but not many. Then a man in the back stood up. "What exactly did you mean by handled?" Melissa didn't hesitate. The county overreacted. Mr. Turner failed to disclose certain historical claims, and Brian's recording captured someone laughing. Not loudly, just enough to break the tension. A woman near the front spoke up. "I saw the videos. There were graves. Real graves." Melissa's tone sharpened. "It's an unregistered family plot. It's being exaggerated." That's when another board member leaned forward. "Then why did state investigators say it could be federally protected?" Silence. For the first time, Melissa didn't answer immediately. And in that pause, something shifted in the room. Confidence turned into doubt. Doubt turned into suspicion. Then suspicion turned into anger. A homeowner stood up. "You told us the land was already approved." Another followed. "You said Turner agreed to sell." Another voice. "You said this was legal." Melissa raised her hand. "I said the HOA had approval to develop a community improvement project on land you don't own." Someone interrupted. That was it. The entire room erupted at once. Voices overlapping. Demands for clarification. Accusations. Questions she couldn't answer fast enough. Brian's recording caught her voice rising for the first time that night. "This is being blown out of proportion because one man refuses to cooperate." But it didn't land the way she expected. Because now people weren't thinking about me. They were thinking about liability. About lawsuits. About insurance. About what happens when 600 homeowners wake up to legal exposure they never agreed to. The next morning, things escalated again. A second HOA board member resigned. Then a third. Then a letter went out to all residents stating that all construction related to the dog park project was suspended indefinitely. But it was too late. Because by then, The county had already issued a formal preservation order, and that meant nobody, not even the HOA, could touch that land again without court authorization. At the same time, Melissa made a decision that would end up sealing her fate. She contacted a local contractor she had previously used for other HOA projects. According to later testimony, she asked them to re-enter the site and complete work under HOA authority. The contractor refused. Not just refused, documented the request, and forwarded it directly to legal counsel. That single email became evidence. By the third day, my phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters, local news stations, even a regional legal blog asking for comment. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The footage Brian captured at the cemetery had already spread online. A bulldozer hitting a cemetery fence. Gravestones in dust. A woman ordering work to continue after human remains were discovered. It didn't matter what side you were on. People recognized arrogance when they saw it. That afternoon, Sheriff Reynolds called me again. "Mr. Turner," he said, "we've formally opened a multi-agency investigation." I exhaled slowly. What does that mean for her? A pause. Right now? It means she's no longer just dealing with the HOA. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood. She was dealing with the state, and possibly the federal government. And somewhere in Brookstone Estates, Melissa Crawford was learning the same lesson in real time. An HOA president can rewrite neighborhood rules, but she can't rewrite federal law. And once that line is crossed, there's no vote that can undo it. The first real subpoena arrived on a Thursday morning. It wasn't dramatic. No flashing lights. No loud confrontation. Just a plain envelope delivered by a county deputy that landed on my kitchen table like a quiet warning that things had officially moved beyond neighborhood conflict. I opened it slowly. Request for records. Turner Ridge Farms banked inside were demands for property history, HOA communications, contractor agreements, and every document tied to Brookstone Estates' dog park project. I already knew what that meant. They were no longer trying to explain what happened. They were trying to reconstruct how it was even possible. By midday, Attorney Michael Harris was sitting in my kitchen with folders spread across the table like a battlefield map. "This is not just civil anymore," he said, adjusting his glasses. I didn't like the tone. "What are we looking at?" He tapped the subpoena with his pen. "Unauthorized land entry, destruction of protected burial property, and possible fraudulent misrepresentation of ownership authority." I leaned back in my chair. "And Melissa?" He didn't answer immediately. That silence told me enough. Across town, Melissa Crawford was experiencing a very different kind of morning. Her inbox was exploding. HOA resignations, insurance cancellation notices, requests from residents demanding legal clarification, and one message marked urgent from the HOA's legal counsel. "Stop all communication about the cemetery incident. Do not authorize any actions. Preserve all records." But Melissa didn't follow instructions. That was part of the problem. At 3:40 p.m., she called another contractor. Not the same one from before. A different company. According to later testimony, she told them, "We need immediate restoration work at Brookstone Estates. The situation is political now, not legal." The contractor asked for documentation. She promised it would be sent later. It never was. But the call was recorded and forwarded. That single mistake became a turning point, because by that evening, federal preservation authorities had upgraded the site classification. What had started as a local dispute over land use was now officially listed as potentially protected historic burial site. Federal review pending. Once that designation hits a system, everything freezes. No construction, no alteration, no fixing it later. Just legal preservation. That night, Sheriff Reynolds called a meeting with me, the state historian, and federal liaison officers. We stood near the taped-off cemetery under floodlights. The ground still showed damage from the bulldozer. Broken stone fragments. Exposed soil. The silence felt heavier than the work that had caused it. The federal liaison finally spoke. If this site is confirmed as pre-20th century family burial grounds, any disturbance may qualify as a federal violation under historical preservation and burial protection statutes. I asked the only question that mattered. What happens next? He looked at me calmly. Then this goes to federal court. The next morning, Melissa Crawford received her formal notice. Not from the HOA, not from the county, from a federal attorney's office. The document was simple, too simple. Notice of legal action. Property dispute and historical site disturbance. Their hands reportedly shook while reading it. And for the first time since this began, she didn't call it a misunderstanding. She called her lawyer. But by then, it was already too late to control the narrative. Because evidence doesn't care about explanations. And the evidence had already started speaking louder than she ever could. The federal courthouse in Richmond didn't look dramatic from the outside. No flashing signs. No chaos. Just tall stone walls and quiet security guards who had seen enough cases like this to know when someone's life was about to change. Inside, though, the atmosphere was different. Heavy. Controlled. Final. I sat on one side of the courtroom beside attorney Michael Harris. On the other side sat Melissa Crawford. For the first time since this began, she didn't look like an HOA president. She looked like someone realizing authority doesn't extend past its limits. Between us sat folders stacked so high they looked like a second wall. Evidence. Reports. Photos. Recorded meetings. Survey maps. Witness statements. Everything. The federal judge entered. Judge Eleanor Brooks. No expression. No wasted movement. Just the kind of presence that made everyone sit a little straighter without being told. State your case, she said. And just like that, it began. The prosecution started first. They didn't exaggerate. They didn't need to. They played the footage. The bulldozer. The fence collapsing. The gravestones. Melissa's voice saying, "Keep digging." A quiet ripple moved through the courtroom. Not outrage. Not shock. Just recognition that something had crossed a line that should never be crossed. Then came the documents. The HOA minutes. The so-called approval. The landscaping plans that claimed ownership of land the HOA never held title to. Attorney Harris leaned over to me slightly. They built authority out of assumptions, he whispered. That's the problem. Then came the witnesses. Sheriff Reynolds testified first. Calm. Direct. He didn't add emotion. He didn't need to. She was informed the property was privately owned and protected, he said. She proceeded anyway. The judge didn't react. But she wrote something down. The state historian followed. This is a continuous family burial site dating back to the 1800s. Disturbance without authorization violates multiple preservation statutes. Then the coroner. Then the surveyor. Then Brian Collins, who played the recording of the HOA meeting. Melissa's voice filled the courtroom again. It's just an old family plot. Except now, it didn't sound confident. It sounded like denial being replayed under oath. When it was Melissa's turn, her attorney tried to frame it differently. He used phrases like miscommunication, good faith development, HOA misunderstanding, but every argument kept hitting the same wall. Intent didn't matter as much as action, and the action was undeniable. Then Judge Brooks asked a question that changed the entire direction of the case. Who authorized you to act on property you did not own? The room went silent. Melissa hesitated. Her lawyer leaned in quickly, whispering something. But she answered anyway. The HOA board approved the project. The judge looked at her. Slowly. Approval to build does not equal ownership. A pause. Do you understand that distinction? For the first time, Melissa didn't respond immediately. That pause said more than any testimony. By the end of the day, the court issued its first ruling, immediate damages assessment, full forensic audit of HOA authority, and preservation enforcement on Turner Ridge Farm. But the most important line came at the very end. The court finds reasonable grounds for civil liability and potential criminal referral. Melissa's face finally changed, because she understood what that meant. This wasn't just about losing a project. It was about what comes after losing control of the narrative. Outside the courthouse, reporters tried to ask me questions. I didn't say much. There wasn't much left to explain, because by then, the story wasn't about a dog park anymore. It was about what happens when people confuse community rules with real law. And real law always wins. By the time we returned to Ashford County, Brookstone Estates didn't feel like the same neighborhood anymore. It looked quieter, too quiet, like everyone was waiting for something to break. And in a way, they were right. Because the HOA wasn't just losing a case. It was unraveling from the inside. The first official crack came when the insurance carrier dropped Brookstone Estates. No warning that mattered in a practical sense. Just a formal notice. Coverage terminated due to material misrepresentation and unauthorized activity. That one sentence changed everything. Because without insurance, the HOA couldn't defend lawsuits. And without defense, every homeowner became exposed. Then came the second hit. A class action attorney appeared. He didn't come to the farm. He went door to door in Brookstone Estates. And he asked one simple question. Did you authorize the destruction of a protected cemetery? Most homeowners said no. Some said they didn't know. A few said they trusted the HOA. But none of that mattered legally. Because trust doesn't override liability. Inside the HOA, panic replaced leadership. Emergency meetings turned into arguments. Arguments turned into resignations. Melissa tried to hold on to control, but every decision she made now required approval from lawyers who no longer trusted her judgment. One board member resigned publicly, sending a letter that ended up posted online. We were led to believe this was a simple development project. It was not. We were not informed of legal risks or land ownership disputes. That letter spread faster than anything else, because it confirmed what people already suspected. They had been misled. Meanwhile, the county officially filed a preservation injunction. That meant the cemetery was now under permanent protection pending historical review. No HOA vote. No contractor. No exception. Just law. Melissa tried one last move. She scheduled a meeting with residents. I didn't attend, but Brian did. And he recorded everything again. She stood at the front of the clubhouse, trying to sound steady. This situation has been exaggerated, she said. We are working with legal counsel to resolve it. But no one clapped. No one nodded. People just watched her. Quietly. Carefully. Like they were finally seeing her clearly. Then a homeowner stood up. How much is this going to cost us? That question broke the room. Because it wasn't emotional. It was financial. And nobody in that room had an answer that made them feel safe. The next morning, I got a call from Attorney Harris. It's done, he said. What's done? Brookstone's legal defense is collapsing. Their counsel has advised board restructuring or full dissolution. I leaned against the kitchen counter. So what happens now? A pause. Now the court decides who pays. And that's when I realized something important. Melissa Crawford had started this thinking she was improving a neighborhood, but she had triggered something much bigger. A legal chain reaction that didn't care about intentions, only consequences. By the end of the week, Brookstone Estates HOA officially entered receivership. A court-appointed administrator took over all decisions. Melissa Crawford was removed from authority pending final judgment. And for the first time since this began, the bulldozers were gone. Not paused, not waiting, gone. But the damage she caused wasn't measured in machines. It was measured in what happens when power is assumed instead of earned. And that was still coming due. The final hearing didn't feel like a trial anymore. It felt like accounting. Everything was already laid out. Everything had already been proven. The only thing left was the cost. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered without ceremony, as always. She looked at the file in front of her, then at the room. This court has reviewed all evidence, testimony, and filings related to Turner Ridge Farm and Brookstone Estates HOA. She paused, then continued. It is clear that unauthorized construction occurred on private property, including disturbance of a protected burial site. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats, but nobody interrupted. Attorney Harris stood. Your Honor, the plaintiff seeks full restoration costs, damages for destruction of protected property, and punitive damages for willful negligence. The number that followed wasn't small. It wasn't even close to small. It was enough that someone in the gallery audibly whispered, "Oh my God." Melissa's attorney tried one final argument. We maintain there was no intent to violate preservation law. This was a misunderstanding of property boundaries and HOA authority. Judge Brooks didn't react immediately. Then she spoke. Intent does not erase consequences when clear warnings were ignored. She looked directly toward Melissa. You were informed. You proceeded anyway. That sentence landed harder than any ruling so far. Then came the judgment. The HOA was ordered to pay full restoration of Turner Ridge Cemetery federal and state preservation penalties, legal damages for property destruction, civil liability for unauthorized land disturbance audit, and dissolution supervision costs. The total figure wasn't read out loud in full, but it didn't need to be. The silence in the courtroom said everything. Then the final blow. Judge Brooks continued. The court recommends referral for further investigation into possible fraudulent representation of authority by HOA leadership. Melissa's head dropped slightly. Not dramatically, just enough. Like something inside her had finally accepted what the rest of the world already knew. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. This time, Melissa didn't stop. She walked straight past them. No comments. No deflections. No confidence. Just silence. 2 weeks later, I stood back on my farm. For the first time since the bulldozers came, the cemetery was quiet again. Not untouched, but restored. Stone by stone, crews had rebuilt the iron fence, repaired broken markers, re-leveled the ground. Historians placed new protective signage confirming the site's historical designation. It didn't erase what happened, but it respected what was left. Sheriff Reynolds visited one afternoon and stood beside me near the fence. Looks better, he said. It looks like it should, I replied. He nodded slowly. You know, most cases like this don't end with restoration. I looked at the graves. This one had witnesses, I said. He gave a faint smile. Yeah, he said. And evidence. As for Melissa Crawford, the last I heard, she was no longer involved in any HOA decisions. Her name appeared only in legal filings and insurance disputes. No speeches, no meetings, no authority, just consequences. And Brookstone Estates? It still exists. But something changed there permanently. People stopped assuming leadership meant ownership. Stopped assuming approval meant permission. Stopped confusing confidence with law. On Sunday morning, I placed fresh flowers on my family's graves like I always had. But this time, I didn't just think about what was destroyed. I thought about what was protected. Because in the end, it wasn't just a cemetery that survived. It was the truth. And truth doesn't bulldoze easily. A month after the court ruling, Brookstone Estates felt different in a way that couldn't be measured on paper. The gates were still there. The houses were still expensive. The lawns were still trimmed to perfection. But something invisible had changed. People looked at authority differently now. They asked questions before accepting answers. They checked documents before trusting speeches. And nobody used the phrase "the HOA said so" the same way again. On my side of the fence, Turner Ridge Farm finally had something it hadn't had in a long time. Peace. Not the quiet kind that comes from nothing happening, but the steady kind that comes from knowing nothing can be taken from you without a fight anymore. One afternoon, Brian Collins stopped by again. He stood near the repaired iron fence and shook his head slightly. Crazy how fast all of this went down, he said. I leaned on the gate. Crazy how fast it almost disappeared. He looked at the cemetery. They ever explain how they thought they owned it? I answered honestly. They didn't think. That was the problem. A few days later, I received one final document. Not a subpoena. Not a notice. A formal acknowledgement from the State Historical Office. Turner Ridge Cemetery, officially designated Protected Historic Burial Site. It wasn't just paperwork. It was recognition. Of history. Of family. of something that outlived every argument made against it. That Sunday, I walked the same path my father used to walk with me when I was a kid. Same dirt road, same old fence line, same wind moving through the trees. When I reached the cemetery, I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there. 11 gravestones. Generations of my family resting in silence. Now protected not just by me, but by law. For a moment, I thought about Melissa Crawford. Not with anger anymore, just understanding. People like her don't usually think they're doing something wrong. They think they're doing something right faster than everyone else. But speed doesn't replace permission, and confidence doesn't replace ownership. I placed the flowers down gently. The wind moved through the field. And for the first time since the bulldozers came, I didn't hear engines. No arguments. No threats. No demands. Just silence. The kind that finally means it's over. And as I walked back toward the farmhouse, I realized something simple. HOAs can vote. They can plan. They can argue. They can even try to reshape neighborhoods. But there are lines they can't cross. Not without consequences. Not without truth stepping in. And not without someone standing their ground when it matters most. Because in the end, land doesn't forget. And neither do the people who came before us.